Mitakepi, Dayahipi. This is a quick explanation of how curriculum units that are built on the Alive framework are organized and how to read them. If you want a more in-depth description of how each section is developed, I recommend the free video course in how to develop your own unit. That is one of the most important ways that we learn in the formal Alive teaching methods training is to actually just make our own, and then we deeply understand each part of the framework. So I would recommend that as a deeper dive. And of course, the ideal experience to prepare you to really implement the Alive framework in your own classroom, environment, school, or program is to actually take one of our trainings. So if you scroll down or you go to languages.ne.org/teachers, you'll find different options where you can either join a cohort or get private coaching, or there are some standalone courses that you'll see linked throughout the resources here that you can work through on your own. But it's really, really helpful to work with a cohort and actually talk with us and do it together and learn from one another. And that is also how you can be prepared to build your own curriculum, which is the hope that you will take this and adapt it to whatever works best in your situation. So this is a super quick overview of how to read one of these documents that you're finding here. But there's a lot more to understand about each and every section, why it's here, why it's organized this way, how we created it. That isn't going to be in this quick overview. So those are places where you can go dive deeper, and I encourage you to do so. Just to cover it super quickly, I'm going to bring one of the finished units up here on the screen. Hopefully, by putting it behind me, it will be relatively clear for you. I want to, first of all, draw your attention to the fact that we've shifted the format of these over the last couple of years. So you may see some older ones, or you may have used an older version. But one of the new features that came out on Google Docs, which, although I'm really trying to use a lot less Google, it really is at this moment the ideal format for sharing these. If we move to a new format, I will try to emulate this same structure so that this video will still make sense. And I do hope we will find a new format so we do not have to use Google. I recommend you look up Google ethical concerns for a whole lot of information about that. But it is an extremely convenient platform for us so far. So this is how we've done it. Recently, they added tabs. So now you may not see this when you open one of the documents, but if you see up in this corner, there is this symbol, which if you put your mouse over it, it says show tabs. So we are now using tabs on all these documents. So probably most of the ones that you want to use are going to have tabs. So I recommend that the first thing you do is you open the tabs. Remember that everything that is included here has been designed on the Alive framework, which emphasizes backwards planning. That means we start from the outcome and we work backwards to what will happen in each class each day so that everything we do is aligned to our purpose. We also provide the overall vision to the students at the outset of any unit so that they understand what our purpose is and how everything is aligned. So please do bear that in mind, that what is being explained to you first is the end, where we're headed, and what is being explained to you last is what to do on day one. Because it doesn't make sense to start doing day one until you have a clear vision of where we're going. Because even if you want to use one of these pre-written, prepared curriculum units with your students, every single group is different. Every single learner is different. There will be some adaptations and adjustments that you will want to make. And you can't do that unless you deeply understand what we're trying to achieve here. And then you can figure out how to help your students achieve that. That's what teaching is. So please prepare yourself to address every single unit from the big picture down to the minutia. It's the opposite of how a textbook is going to work, okay? Because this is not teacher-centered learning. This is facilitated student-driven learning. And that means that we engage in active work, thinking, creation, problem solving alongside the students rather than dictating to them what they're supposed to remember. And therefore, the design is the opposite of a teacher-centered textbook. So just really quickly, the first tab is going to be the unit overview. You'll see some information at the top about where we see this as being appropriate for. Quick note, there are other videos about this, but you will not find that the Alive curriculum is strictly divided by grade levels. Grade levels are one of the main destructive ideas brought in colonial education. And when we actually look at effectiveness by our metrics in terms of producing fluent speakers, creating a speaker community, having trauma-informed healing, community nurturing learning experiences, we don't find any use for grade levels. We find very little use for age distinctions whatsoever. There's a little bit in there, but really rarely do we find that age is very useful in dividing up how we're going to approach our instruction. Because again, this is a process of rebuilding an intergenerational learning community, and it is largely student driven. So students have more in common across age groups and across grade levels than they have that separates them from one to another. There's individuality within every group, and there's commonality within every group. So long story short, grades and ages, we give some idea here, but you're not going to find too much distinction. We're going to use that less rather than more. Again, there are video courses on how to plan and deeply understand each and every one of these segments of the template. Each segment is really important. When we do trainings on building your curriculum, we spend a minimum of 1 week on each and every segment because there is a lot to understand in it. But basically, going super quickly, the first segment tells you why we made this unit, why we came up with this idea. The second segment is the most important segment that you will read, bar none. And it is, what will the students be creating? What is their public product? These next three segments are reflections that give you more detail on exactly how that will be created. And please make sure to pay a lot of attention to the collaboration structure and the student control. If you're not following some close version of the collaboration structure and the student control, you're probably not leading to a genuine public product. So those details are important, but this segment is mandated to be short. It is just, what are we creating? And that is what we show students at the outset of the unit. We show them some examples. We tell them that this is the goal. They may co-create that goal with us. We hope so. But this is what we are striving to create, and everything we do throughout the unit is going to flow from there. I always say that the next segment down here, PBLI unit title, is the least important segment that you will ever write. It's literally just for filing. It's just a quick title. And in fact, I didn't even make mine match. It doesn't matter. It's just literally for purposes of finding it again 6 months or a year from now. What's the name of this unit? It has no meaning pedagogically. The driving question, however, does. The driving question, we have videos on exactly how to design a driving question. The driving question should ideally be displayed and discussed throughout the unit. It is a big, open philosophical pondering with which we are engaging throughout this unit. It can certainly be adjusted to match your context better, but it is the deep life question that we're digging into. You have the content objectives, and then that is followed by language objectives. Every unit will have these because we are building skills through the medium of languages, meaning there are skills and know-how that is being acquired, and the language is a medium through which we are acquiring it. This distinction is extremely important in terms of why does project-based language immersion work better than other methods of language teaching, is specifically because the language is the medium for the activities we are doing, not the objective, not the main focus of the activities that we're doing. So these are going to be here. If you are working in a monolingual context, these are going to dominate, but for everybody else, These are going to be pretty balanced. You are going to teach skills just as you're going to model language. You're going to model skills and engage in practice of skills, just like you're going to model language and engage in practice of the language. And the summative assessment, which is going to be over here in the next tab, is going to evaluate the skills that they have gained through this unit, both content objectives and language objectives. So these two segments here are what they are meant to accomplish. These are the objectives that you can align with your local standards or any other requirements, testing, anything else that your institution might be obliging you to follow. Look at these and adapt them to that so that you can answer questions in whatever the terminology and particular language of your institution is about what is the point of this unit. What is the value of this unit? It's right here in the objectives. And of course, an area of adaptation is if there are any of these objectives that are already known too easy for your learners, then you may need to make them more complex. If there are any that are out of reach beyond the zone of proximal development for your learners, you may need to adapt them. So this may be a place of adaptation. I haven't filled them in here yet for this particular example, but you may fill in whatever standards are relevant for you here. That is largely something that we do for other people for accountability. But as you fill them in, you may make some tweaks, some adjustments to your context. So it's worth spending some time there, but everybody's context is different, what their school is stressing, what standards speak to them, what feels most relevant for your learners. This is something that would be adapted in each scenario. The summative assessment, now this is very important. This is not a grading rubric. That's the next tab. This is a description of what will happen at the moment of the summative assessment. What is going to occur on the last day or sometimes 2 days of this unit that is going to be their moment of assessment. This is the moment where you're going to sit on your hands and evaluate how well they fare, and you're going to see the outcome. And that's where you can fill out your final rubric. So this is a description of what will occur, what will happen, what activity is planned to be the assessment. The reflection and improvement opportunity is the activity, the event that occurs just before the summative assessment. You adapt the schedule to your needs, but it should be just before the summative assessment because it's their last chance to get some feedback and make some changes, make some improvements, notice areas where they could do better. Before they are summatively assessed. So there should be, in a lot of units, there are multiple opportunities to get feedback and make improvements. That's part of our collective problem solving and creativity process. But there is a set activity that happens just before the end that is the reflection and improvement opportunity where there's a structured time to give and get feedback and to make improvements. And this is because we want to make sure that we are deschooling students, that we are moving them out of that authoritarian system thinking where they're just rushing to get it done and to say, look, I did it. We want to make sure that they've been given time and support to actually care about the quality of the thought, the quality of the work and the process that they have put in here to catch their own errors, to see their own areas for growth, to also recognize their own strengths. Self-assessment is something that's often just disregarded or thought of as like a accessory to grading because of the toxic culture we have around grading. But self-evaluation is the most important evaluation they will ever do, and they will continue to do it for the rest of their lives. It's called holding yourself accountable. It's called personal growth. So these are chances, usually in their groups, for them to practice putting themselves out there, accepting feedback, crucial life skills, evaluating that feedback to see if they agree with it, putting together a plan, for improvement and acting on that plan. Some of the most important life skills that we can possibly have. So this moment is not a graded moment, but it is not a dispensable moment. It is the moment that makes the summative assessment so meaningful to the students because they did their best and then they realized that they could improve it and then they did improve it. And now they're bringing you something that they have truly iteratively, self-critically, reflectively worked on. And that's what gives its meaning. For those of you concerned about any form of cheating, including plagiarism via generative AI, this is a wonderful way to make absolutely sure that there has not been any shortcut taking or any plagiarism because this is the accountability moment. This is where did you get these ideas? Why did you do it this way? Don't you think that this would have maybe been a better way to do it? What about this? Have you thought about that? There is no substitute for what happens at this moment before the summative. Before that, at different moments, which are going to be reflected on this other tab here, your calendar, are the formative assessments that you've done. Formative assessments in the Alive framework are never quizzes. They are never tests. They are rarely assignment submissions like essay submissions. They are usually live practical activities, embodied practical experiences where students attempt to use the skills they have been practicing throughout the activity-based lessons and see what happens. And you, as the teacher facilitator, see what happens. And you, of course, they're formative assessments. So you adjust the calendar, the activities, the guidance, the scaffolding according to what you see in your formative assessments. This is a foundational skill of teaching. If it's not something that you've been tasked with before in your role, or if you have only done this in the form of quizzes, tests, assignment submissions in your role, this is something we do tons of work on, hands-on together in our training cohorts. And I would strongly encourage you to join us in a training cohort to learn all these other ways of facilitating really effective, fun, engaging, meaningful, helpful, productive, formative assessments that move beyond those teacher-centered rote traditions that we have. Below here, this segment is actually always the same. It's just a standard guide for how we might introduce the project, how we tend to introduce projects on the first day. So you notice we're working backwards. Up here, we started at the very end. We moved our way to the summative assessment. What comes before that? What comes before that? What comes before that? And what comes first is the intro. So here you can delete or change anything here, but this is just a standard guide to more or less the format that we follow when we introduce an Alive project-based immersion unit or a project-based unit for you monolingual context teachers. This is generally how we're going to begin. Down here, you may or may not find this segment filled out. You may or may not find this segment. This is a brainstorming segment, okay? These are activities, resources, language chunks that we did in brainstorming when we did our initial planning. Sometimes we've left it there, sometimes we've deleted it, or we did it in different ways. A lot of times we did it together orally, so it wasn't a lot written here. But this is just a collection of ideas that we did in our creation process. They're mostly kept here until we redistribute them into their places in the rest of the unit. So for most intents and purposes, you can ignore this segment because it was for brainstorming. These are segments that every single teacher is going to have to fill out individually. I can't tell you what these are precisely for your learners and your context. A scaffolding is just a place to list out as you review the overview, and then you probably are going to go into the calendar of activities and then into the lesson plans. Back here on the overview is just a place to list any scaffolding tools that you feel you're going to need to create or plan for your students to be successful in the skills that we're acquiring and in the formative assessments that are planned. Every group is different. Your sequence may be different. Their, pre-existing knowledge may be different. What you find works really well with them may be different. What you've already done too much of and they're sick of it and you don't want to do it anymore may be different. So this is a worksheet space for you to note whatever scaffolding um, items or strategies, because sequencing is a big part of scaffolding. We have trainings on that. Um, yeah, we have lots of trainings on scaffolding. If this isn't something you feel super confident in, we would love, love, love to have you join us and work on how we do scaffolding to make sure that every single learner is successful, because that is a cornerstone of the Alive framework. But whatever the scaffolding is for your context, this is just a list of things basically it's a to-do list, things you'll be creating or gathering or finding or planning. Community connections to build, obviously specific to your community, but as you go back up through the brainstorm, through what's going to be happening, through the skills that they're going to be acquiring, we ask of you to brainstorm real live people who are part of your community. Now, you define community. Your community may be local, they may be global. Your community may be in the same building and they may be multilingual, multi-ethnic, various backgrounds. Your community may be people of one ethnicity who live in different places. Your community may primarily be certain generations of people. Um, you may be focused on certain generational connections. For others, you may want to really diversify. I don't know who your community is. But as you looked through that, the question to you is, who can we build a bridge with? Who can we connect with? Who can either come in to us or we can go out to them to break the wall of our learning environment and to apply and experience and build relationships about these skills and these topics and these activities with real people. Um, for language teachers, this is your chance. There's a few different ways to do this, and I have some trainings on how to do it. You can do it with people who don't speak the target language. Maybe it left their family a generation ago, or they're part of the community in a different way, but they don't speak this language. We can build those connections, and I have some trainings on how to do that. But the sort of default here is who speaks your language, who works in this field, or who speaks your language, who has done a project like this, or who speaks your language, who is affected by this issue, or who speaks your language, who is super talented and is making content about how to do these things. How can you build a real human connection with them? You plan that before you start the unit because it probably takes time to set up. Obviously, the issue of budget. One thing about the Alive framework is that everything we plan, for the most part, is extremely low budget. My own teaching experience influences this a lot because I worked in schools with absolutely no budget. I worked in schools that were condemned, physically unsafe in multiple ways. I worked in schools with no bathrooms. I worked in schools with no windows. I worked in some rough schools. Okay, so my assumptions of what the budget is that's available to teachers are usually nothing. But I've also consulted with schools and helped build programs that were actually really well funded, and there were really amazing materials, opportunities, software that could be purchased. So again, this is specific to your situation, how you're going to be able to pull this off, and it's something that you're going to want to speak to your team in your institution about. And then the notes for future use of the unit is it's the last before there's just the copyright info here, the licensing info. This is a really, 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 really important segment for you to remember to use as you teach this unit. This is where you write down what happened. Now you can change the format to make it work for you, but I like to keep notes every single day and I like to keep them super brief, just bing, 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 couple of words. I'm a long talker, brief writer. So what worked well? Deltas are for what I would change. It didn't work. It was slow. It was inefficient. We couldn't get the materials. It was too easy. It was too challenging. Whatever the case may have been, I note these for myself. Why? Because the minute we wrap up this unit, I'm going to be focused on the next one and I'm going to forget the lessons that I learned. And I have absolutely had the experience as a teacher of learning the same lesson again the next year because I forgot to change that about this unit. And there I did it again, and same issue. Doesn't always work that way, but often it does. And so I never teach a unit the exact same way twice. There are always little tweaks. There's always room for growth. So I put those right here on the overview page, right here on the front of the unit, because a lot of times these are printed out and stored. I'll write them in pen on the front. Um, hey, remember, these were the lessons we learned last year. And this is also a chance for you to reflect on, we talk a lot about the learning environment being like a laboratory, being your science experiment, essentially. You're trying things and you're seeing what happens. And if it doesn't work, you're going to try something else. You're going to make adjustments. And you're going to keep that scientist's mind as you teach. And so this is a place for you to do that. Feel free to adapt it to the note-taking framework that works for you. That's the first tab. The second tab is, of course, the rubric that we would suggest that covers all the crucial competencies, the skills for your summative assessment. Couple of things that these will always have, and you can, of course, make adaptations. We will generally combine the skills into something that sounds clear and coherent for the students, but all the skill objectives will be listed here. Sometimes we blend two into one line just so that we don't have tons and tons of lines. We sort of use common sense for that. But all the skill objectives have to be assessed in the summative assessment. If that skill objective is not assessed somehow by your summative assessment, then it's not an objective of your unit. So you need to go back upstream and adjust accordingly. So the summative assessment has to address all the skill objectives. And then it always has multiple levels. Some people use colors, some people use numbers. I use usually these words. And then there must always, 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 always be a field for comments. A couple of the base units have an exception because they do really super simple products when they're just first trying out what a project is, and we don't do much error correction. But it is very important for your students to receive as many specific comments as possible to make sure that they feel seen. It's a really important part of this, to be seen. So it's a really good practice to make comments while they are presenting, what you saw them do, what you loved about it, what was really interesting, what was creative, what was memorable. And then, of course, you may make comments about what can be improved, and you should. But it's important to also make those other comments so that this is not a place for just criticism and negativity. This is a place for them being seen for this incredible creative problem solving that they did and the collaborative work that they did through the medium of this language. I usually use some kind of wording like this. It gets adjusted. But one thing that I do, you don't have to do it, but you have to decide whether you want to do it, is I have an over the top amazing category. In this rubric, it's called excellent. That means that this student or group just went above and beyond and was so amazing in this category, and therefore they get extra points. That might not work for you for a bunch of reasons. You can take it out. But in the way that I have designed my rubrics, acquired is the goal. I saw them demonstrate this skill. They can do it. That is acquired. Great. That is satisfactory. That is good. That is what we want. Passing, great, praiseworthy, wonderful. Excellent for me is over the top, unbelievable. And the reason that I include this is because we encourage that kind of autonomous curiosity and that kind of personalized going the extra mile, going down the rabbit hole, overdoing it, just getting super into it. We encourage that in project-based learning within practical limits. And if a student did that, I like to recognize them for that. It can also help if perhaps they neglected or struggled with another part of it. But that is all up to you. You decide within your framework, within your values, within the regulations that you have, whether that works for you. But I just wanted to point out to you that my total on this one is 12 points because I have 1, 2, 3, 4 categories in which they can achieve up to 3 points. The third category is worth 3 points, 0, 2, 3. 3, 3, 3, 3 would be 12. That would be an A+. You did great. Excellent would be extra credit. I just want to make that clear. But the important thing here is to make comments as much as you can so that students truly feel seen and you've really engaged with what they've put so much effort into creating. This is where the ownership and the originality is really important. The next tab is calendar of activities. This is something that I generally keep next to me. I also usually adjust it, whether I use the electronic document or a pen and paper, or a whiteboard actually is a great system if you have a little mini whiteboard for yourself, because this will change with how each day goes, with how the formative assessments look. You will make some adjustments with this. But having this calendar laid out, first of all, it tells me when I can expect us to wrap up this unit with our final assessment, but also it gives me a picture of what I'm trying to accomplish each day. It keeps me on task in terms of facilitating our progress and keeping us going. But it also reminds me which activities are meant to be executed as formative assessments. Again, we do a lot of training around how to execute a formative assessment. So these are not lesson plans. This is just a calendar of a super quick summary of more or less the main important thing that happens on each day so that I can see how it is organized. If you only see your learners maybe 2 days a week or whatever, you have 2 days in a week and the others won't have anything or something like that. So you're going to adapt this. But for me, it's just helping me to keep the overall flow in mind and make adjustments as needed. Whereas this final tab here, lesson plans, not every unit will have this, but a lot of the units do have an extremely detailed lesson flow with stage notes for the teacher facilitator and links to each resource right there when you need it. I do a lot of teaching online, so I keep this tab open and I just click on what I need at the time when I need it. That's super helpful. It can, of course, be printed out. It can be projected. It is generally, it is not a teaching document. I just want to be super clear about this. This is a behind the scenes document, and you will end up making adjustments, but it is for you to know, and you may choose some of these things and display them to students, but it's for you to know what are our focal phrases today? What's my engagement question as they come through the door? And this follows the activity-based learning structure, which we have a whole training on if you haven't worked with activity-based lessons before, but in order to successfully implement project-based learning and project-based language immersion, we absolutely must use the activity-based lesson framework, which is very different from other lesson frameworks. So we generally don't find compatibility with like lesson plan templates that you might get off of Teachers Pay Teachers, or that a school might have adopted, because they don't specifically target how language is acquired and the steps that we need to go through to make sure brains acquire language. And they're not designed to be aligned to a project-based outcome, which these are. So this is probably the place where you're the least comfortable. It's the most different. But every single way that it is different is linked to its effectiveness. It is different because that's what makes it more effective in actually nurturing new fluent speakers, in making things actually fun, in making the class actually emotionally safe, in seeing that really rapid progress, fluency in under 2 years. We get that from structuring our lessons this way and not other ways. And we have tons of videos, tons of trainings on what this is and why and what it means. So there's lots and lots more to learn about how to understand these and how to implement these, but the form that they take is important. And then, of course, the links are to the resources that we've developed, but as you develop scaffolding, you may want to swap those out for the links that make sense for your group. So again, the first tab was the big overall picture. We started with the end. And then the very last tab, is what tells us what happens on day 1, minute 1, what happens on day 2, minute 1, what happens on day 3, minute 1. But all of that is based on the planning and structuring that we have already done. As your students move into the higher levels of proficiency and they have become accustomed to project-based learning and they have gone through some deschooling processes, you will be able to have much more summary notes on those activity-based lessons because students will be co-facilitating, co-structuring the lessons with you. That's something that we do some trainings on, but it comes after they've done quite a few project-based units with you and when they are at least intermediate proficiency in the language. So it's not going to be right away. And most teachers really need that level of detail just to get started and to get into the flow of it because we are all learning a brand new system for what happens when we come to learn. It's a whole new experience. So it's okay if you're a little bit like, again, we have tons of resources. We would love to work with you personally, love to have you join one of our cohorts or do individual coaching, whatever you feel would be the most productive for you. But this is how to understand the templates that you're seeing. And I do hope you'll practice reading through a few to get a feel for how each section can help you and inform you and guide what happens in your learning environment.